It took 3 more potions to finally get my skin to knit. The burns were finally covered by the new tissue. It felt so wrong to have murky green scabs covering my body. That troll blood had to pop out somewhere, I guess. The alchemicals cost us a fair bunch of silver, but I was up and able, and so were the lads. Our new mission placed us on the flank of a small army, accompanying a Cruniac flesh convoy. We were exposed on the far left flank. Even so, we were glad to be as far away from the demon flesh as we could get. I could gather very little information regarding why we were doing such a horrendous act. Our employer's name yielded very little from the local sources. Must have been a foreign noble from the southern baronies. Madness. Cruniac is by far the most abhorrent and most powerful evil known to man other than the devil himself. I shudder to think at what cost was our cargo obtained at. Cruniac, the living mountain, is covered in his progeny. Scores of gnashing mouths and orifices, out of whom legions of vicious minions are spewed along with the deadly gases and malign fogs that shroud him. To amputate a part of Cruniac, one would have to ward the entire mining crew from these afflictions. That, or have enough coin to pay a legion of greedy mercs to risk everything. Either way, I was glad not to have taken part in the harvesting endeavor. It's risky enough to traffic this flesh within civilized lands. All weaving or handling of cargo related to weaving is punishable with hanging on the spot within the bourgs. Much evil was done to the world as a consequence of ill-fated weavers. The world entire had to witness the birth of a pregnant progeny from Cruniac's loins. These creatures died of undiscerned causes, yet what was clear enough was their connection to the 2 plagues that ravaged the civilized lands. These misbegotten happenings are considered by all scholars to be the result of tempering with the indiscernible forces of the weave. The sheer fact that mortals could be in congress with such as Cruniac makes weaving a dreaded and so much more forbidden affair. Only those sanctioned by the Guild of Weavers are tolerated, out of necessity, to meddle with the outwardly protocols. So we made sure we volunteered for a spot in the convoy that allowed us a hasty getaway if questers or other lawmen hosts would waylay us. We weren't so lucky. 1 week on our journey, crossing the woods belonging to the Burg of Lipvig, we ran in what seemed to me a humongous anthill built right in the middle of the narrow road we were using. The structure was built out of boulders, earth, and wood. It seemed man-made, yet the tools used left odd marks. As the scouts returned, we received news of the force closely surrounding our position. Cruniac was present all around us, in the shape of his black carapaced minions, avatars that shared his common will, to deprive us of his flesh. They were not attacking us outright, for they were still amassing numbers. God alone knows why they were not already prepared in full ambush against us. We thanked the Lord in hasty prayer and prepared for battle. As soon as all the lads were geared and juiced up on alchemicals, we left for where the Cruniacs were congregating in the largest group. It was going to be a nightmare. The appearance that the Cruniacs took was deliberately hellish. You could not find 2 of the same design. Each was horrible in its own way, covered by eyes, scores of gasping and foaming mouths, covered by thick articulated carapaces, endowed by heavy spiked tentacles ready to inflict carnage all around them. Thanks to the alchemicals, all of the band had a cold calm about us. Not as much to call ourselves brave, but steady enough to hold the line confronting such a nightmarish foe. Our formation was impeccable. The floggings and beatings worked, but what really got the lads to train hard were the reprimands to their coin and booze payments. So all the greens were checkered with vets, spaced enough to quickly close ranks if needed, yet not so much that fighting would prove difficult. The first line was ready to engage. Our sergeants gave the proper whistles. We advanced towards the Cruniacs in the hopes of dispatching them before they amassed in overwhelming numbers. Soon we crossed a ravine and started climbing our way out. Upon reaching the end of the slope, we could see the opposing host in the valley below. Most of our enemies were of the runtier sort, no larger than a human, small yet horrible to look upon in their own way. Others were as big as a wagon, however, filled with barbed appendices and tentacles that flailed menacingly around them. All were arrayed around a spiked mound, a form of a giant fortified anthill. It looked exactly like the barricade blocking our path on the road. We reorganized ourselves so we presented a uniform front. Shields up to receive the hail of stones they started flinging our way. Some were as big as a fist, enough to crack a skull. We flung our missiles ourselves, to not little effect. We knew we had to go through this the hard way. An all-out melee till the bitter end. This enemy was not going to flee. As soon as we started shooting our heavy crossbows, they decided to charge. All at once, as if guided by an omnipresent common will. Our bolts fell a few of them, but all in all, what the missiles did good for us was to force the foe to charge our uphill position. The fight was hard. Although conventionally unarmed, the foe wielded heavy spikes that could puncture mail, cudgeled tentacles that could ensnare and daze, along with scythed limbs that made grievous wounds in unarmored flesh. They lacked shields, yet they were covered in scales of hard elastic shell, sort of what a giant roach would be covered in. We used our position to leverage heavy polearms on the enemy. Billhooks, halberds, and polehammers fell on the foe from our second line, while our first rank held firm. The worst part of the fight was bared by our flankers. Their javelins and arrows did little to no harm on the heavily armored monsters. Their charge, while initially able to scatter the front of the Cruniacs, was ill-fated. It's almost impossible to disengage from the tentacled freaks. Many of the lads received puncture wounds, a few broken or dislocated limbs. The good gear we were equipped with served us well. Coats of plates all around, sabatons and mittens, riveted mails and quality gorgets. What carried the day, however, were the alchemicals we ingested before combat. They gave us hardy staying power and renewed vigor. We fought like Pictish fanatics. The foe, however, was as relentless as an army of ants, so the engagement consumed itself fast through the fervor of the fighting on both sides. The fighting finally died down, along with the last Cruniac. The corpses were staked high in front of our lines. The good Lord delivered us from evil. We had no time to check if the Cruniacs were pearl-bearing or no, so no loot was had. The occasional green brother would pry a piece of carapace in the hopes of turning it into something useful. All activity was quickly curbed by the sergeant, however. We had to return on our place of the flank to defend the main body of the caravan. Upon making our way to the road, we found the wagons forming a rough, elongated rectangle, the space between them covered with pavis-bearing pike and crossbow men. Standard. I also knew the wagons were tied with chains to each other, and the beasts of burden were covered by reinforced wicker shields in the middle of the formed square. Surrounding our wagon fort was a horde of Cruniacs, assaulting our convoy on two sides. We quickly formed up our ranks and prepared to charge the back of our enemy. Soon we were rushing downhill towards the foe. In the last moment, the Cruniacs turned their two back lines to face the coming onslaught. They executed this maneuver with an eerie sense of mute, yet perfect coordination. We smashed into their waiting jaws, making great use of our heavy plate armor to placate their spiked limbs. As expected, the brothers from within the wagon fort made a sortie by using the untacked sides of the camp. Thus we were hewing at our foe from three sides. The battle turned in our favor. The sergeants gave the expected whistle, and all the unengaged battle brothers drank the second wind potions, saved for this moment of the combat. New vigor animated the freshly rotated troops of the front ranks. We carved dents in the Cruniac mass. Soon the foe's staggered line was unable to return in kind our devastating and methodical violence output. As expected, they fought to the last one of them. We killed every Cruniac. As soon as the battle was over, we took our time to make sure all the Cruniacs were finished off. Absurdly hardy creatures. They can survive even the most devastating wound, and can regenerate to full form if given enough time. We fell upon the road barricade with the desperation of cornered beasts. We knew other Cruniacs had to be close by, and we would not face another onslaught at this time. The after days from the ingested alchemicals was about to kick in. We could manage it in a fight, but only if we were forced into it. A much better option was to be on the move again. After traveling for a few miles, we decided to set up our wagon fort atop a hill for the night. We found ourselves stranded in a tide of migrating darkbloods. We were not alone, to be sure. All the northern baronies were caught in an inexplicable mass migration of orcs. From the furthest reaches of the Seaborgs, all goblinoid creeps uprooted their tribes and converged northward towards Cruniac. Was this it? The reason for their migration? It seemed to be. No blood was shed between these once fierce rivals. Wherever their paths crossed, Cruniacs and orcs seemed to coexist, even fight on the same side. Under torture, dark blood prisoners squirmed admission of shamanic visions within their number. Common dreams of a grotesque great maw that offered its flesh to be devoured by its followers were an omnipresent admission. Thus far, Cruniac never made contact with anything, aloof and unresponsive to worship or sacrifice alike, from either the lowliest or the greatest of creatures. There was no precedent for such a thing happening. It might have been that a massive weaver was impersonating Cruniac's voice to lure the orcs. Yet few such weavers ever existed, if any at all. Such were the vocal musings of our employer. In truth, we cared little for the great scheme of things. We carried no weight to influence such powers. No matter the reason, we found ourselves stranded between meandering cavalcades of darkbloods. It would have been impossible to reach a nearby burg without getting bogged down in overwhelming fights. We scouted a convenient location to fortify our caravan in, so we decided to make our stand on a flat hilltop. There was also a convenient small stream jutting out of the rock face. We chained the caravan's wagons to each other in a circle, placed heavy boulders inside and under our once mobile palisade, dug a wide ditch, a man deep, drove sharpened stakes into the lip of the trench. Kalisark gave the order to empty the contents of some of his glass amphorae within the ditch, in an even manner. Some translucent slime came out. Nobody was to touch it. It soon became obvious why. We were next instructed to throw some of the orc heads we had pickled in the slime. The goo started to rapidly melt the organic feed, and grew in size as it did so. We had ourselves a redoubtable fort, positioned on a steep hill. Only a very determined orc force could take this entrenched position. We were hoping the darkbloods would much rather avoid the confrontation and be on their way. In the first few days, this was the case. Wild droves of orcs tried to approach our fortification, but were curbed by heavily concentrated crossbow shots. These few days of skirmishes were put to good use. A wide system of trenches was dug in the middle of the camp, forming a refuge for the unarmored camp followers, pack animals, and traction bulls. The pavises once used to protect the wagon animals were turned into roofing for the trenches. Soon our vulnerable assets were protected from all missile attacks. The following week tested our resilience in a more demanding way. More savvy orcs decided to try their luck and grouped up with a cohort of Uruks, heavily armored and very disciplined troops, not lacking in combat alchemicals either. Hard fighting followed. We had the higher ground, from where our ballistae and heavy crossbows kept the foe from resting before finally charging us. The hand-to-hand combat tilted in our favor due to the uneven footing the orcs were struggling with. The acid ditch consumed greedily anybody that fell in, the ichor inside swelling and brimming over down the hillsides. 2 more days the Uruks tried to dislodge us and failed. At times the heavily armored orcs succeeded in taking over one of the wagons, but were quickly dispatched by bursting alchemical pots, followed by brutal hand-to-hand combat. Our armors gave us a serious edge during the engagements. Masterwork full-plate armor, with interlocking plates that protected our weak spots, were levered in every encounter. Both sides were drugged to the gills, alchemicals to boost our morale. Reflexes, strength, and endurance fumed in our bloodstreams. The orcs had their own brews that goaded them. The carnage was immense. For every one of our fallen brothers, 10 orcs died. Finally, the darkblood tribe that first attacked us decided to cut their losses and be on their way. The Uruks, however, living for the thrill of war, were determined to lay siege to us. We ran out of food fast. What followed was a tense yet easy choice. We could not sacrifice our load-bearing beast for food, since that would have meant compromising all of our caravan effort and forfeit all our pay. We could not afford to fast either. Going hungry would have meant going weak, and the fights were too tough to allow for such a thing to happen. I made the call to string up and carve some of the fallen orcs, a grisly affair that would haunt us. The half-orcs tasked with the unholy process were some of our oldest veterans. I knew that I could count on them to keep their wits during and after the cursed harvesting. The fallen dark bloods were processed for meat in one of the wagons, so that most of our brothers could disassociate the dark deed from the act of feeding. More Uruks joined the camp of the besiegers the following week. They outnumbered us 3-1 at that point. When a group of troll-herding goblins joined the siege, they decided to try an assault again. The approaching lumbering behemoths were protected from our ballista shots by thick wooden pavises covered in stretched raw hides. Once they reached our compound, they easily broke into the wagons and inflicted serious losses before they could be reduced to piles of smoldering flesh by alchemical fires. The day was saved by the sheer grit of our lads. We simply kept a steady flow of men into the fight, filling the gaps where the defensive ring was pierced at times. Soon withdrawal settled in for both us and the Uruks. The alchemicals we used the past weeks wore off, and dissonance took the place of violent zeal. As per procedure, we kept a contingent of brothers clean from the chems so they could pull a defensive shift, while the rest of us waited for the toxins to be expelled from our bodies. Some of the brothers called for bondage during this time. Suicide sometimes seems like a valid alternative to alchemical withdrawal. While our enemy recuperated in their own manner, a halfling camp follower pulled off an impressive feat of heroism. He snuck into the orc camp and managed to place a hex token near the tent of the Uruk chief. This triggered the unstable minds of all the surrounding orcs. A few days later, the Uruks interpreted the mental turmoil they were weathering as an omen and decided to move on northward. Rain, fog, and rain. This was our due these past months. The thick sheath of clouds, covering the treetops, smudging the sun's light, keeping us all perpetually moist and cold, made it feel like we were all slowly but surely digested in some monster's sprawling guts. If the cultists are right, this is exactly true. Some sort of Cruniac stewing, a way of eating at the peoples around him. Today we had to meet up with a knight of the rampant Griffin's order. He went by the name of Obricht, a beast of a man, tall as a throgman, stout as an auroch. He was accompanied by a cohort of mounted men at arms. Everyone was equipped with crossbows, spears, and shields, hired by the Burg of Cruniac to take care of a local issue with some of the old copper mines. We, the Sons of Dismas, were hitched to fight in a tight square formation to give the enemy something to chew on, while the mounted troops maneuvered to carry a charge in the foe's rear. We were expecting Uruks this time around. Reports signaled that they took control of all the nearby breeding pits and were amassing a force of orcs. That meant we were to expect a first wave of slave dark bloods whose sole purpose was to tire us before the real fight began. The world is going to hell. It was midday, and a full force of dark bloods was challenging us in the open. Without the sun's direct light warding them away, the orcs were free to rampage about. We stood our ground and took the brunt of their force. A foe twice our number, and of a stronger breed than usual, swarmed us. We delivered butchery. Most of the orcs lay dead and broken in heaps around our formation. Encased in hardened plate armor and fighting in a tight, orderly formation gave us an edge over the naked, disorganized brutes. We shifted the first spears thrice during the melee. We were all tired. Only a few pockets of frenzied darkbloods were still engaged when the Uruks appeared at the edge of the nearby woods. fresh, silent, all business. Hardened killers, the lot of them. They formed a boar snout to counter our square. We could not reform into an echelon formation since we were still moping up the remaining orcs. Square it was then. We received the strong Uruk offensive formation with great strain in our flank. By this time, all our brothers were quaffing the second wind potions, great alchemicals for fighting endurance. We would be dealing with the side effects and withdrawal later. At the time, survival was in question. The Uruks inflicted heavy losses in our number. They fought with a smoldering rage, a bitter determination. Encased in heavy, thick armors of plate and rings, they were hard to be brought down. But so were we. Both sides were using alchemicals. Both sides were fighting like there was no retreat. A mad, concentrated, methodical slaughter. By this point, their boar snout formation punched our square in two. Our force divided. We tried desperately to coordinate and unify our flanks. We were failing. The charging horsemen came crashing into the Uruks' back front. The disciplined darkbloods maneuvered at the last moment with mad coordination, so that some of their pike bearers blunted our horsemen's charge. The Uruks were hard-pressed, however, having to fight us on three fronts. A deafening shriek was heard over the clamor of the battlefield. We did not get a chance to see what made the hellish sound. We only felt a literal shockwave pushing the already packed Uruks into our fronts. The creature was the size of a hovel. It pounced up and down through the massed Uruks, dismembering them as it pressed the attack. A royal griffin dressed in thick skirts of padded mail joined the fray on our side. Obrick turned out to be part of a Talon, a full-on griffin knight. He joined the fray on his destrier, however, preferring to lead the men into the melee directly. A true knight. The fight was soon over. The Uruks fought to the last of their number, surrounded on all sides by this point. Without trolls, however, they could not counter the Griffin's ferocity. We expected as much. There are no fiercer darkbloods than the mighty Uruks, yet there is only so much infantry may do against bestial adversaries. Giant simpleton babies that don't know their own strength and are pushed into evil stuff by their smaller evil cousins. That's the common view about trolls held by the average burgher. Utter nonsense, of course. Trolls, like all dark-blooded creatures, are plagued from birth by maddening impulses, some pumped into them by the womb pits, some by their own twisted mind makeup. Coupled with their gargantuan strength and ceaseless appetite, this makes the trolls compelled to wickedry. In some respects, they are more driven than their smaller cousins, since they physically can't feel satiation. They are perpetually hungry, perpetually seeking to obtain a new source of food. Coupled with an innate dark-blood cruelty, they eat their meals in very satanically creative ways. For them, cooking, as much as it can be called that, is a challenge of how creative they can become with their tortures. When within a horde of darkbloods, all must be continually about the industry of finding new food sources for the trolls, lest they become viewed as such themselves. So yes, one could say that the trolls are the power behind the reckless expansionism of the dark-blooded hordes. Troll hide is an organ. It has several tissue layers and separate glands that work together with a will of their own. Kalisark the alchemist told me this. The material's flexibility and strength change depending on the situation. Much of this comes from sacks filled with a substance whose resistance to flow changes depending on the feelings the troll perceives. So one can more easily puncture troll hide if the creature is relaxed and happy. We are not sure why that is, and I know it sounds off, but it's the truth. This might somewhat explain the reckless behaviors that goblin troll herders adopt when goading their charges into battle. Stressing the trolls makes sure their hides are primed and ready to receive blows. A fully flexed troll hide is tougher than queer booley, yet somehow does not restrict movement as some areas have a different composition. Trolls are exceptionally cruel. We draw them in with scent and sound. Scent by combining basic strong-smelling alchemical compounds with the miasma of rotting flesh. Sound by making a creature wail. We usually use a young animal separated from its mother as bait for our traps. We tie a lamb or a puppy high up in the tree's crown. The distress calls will make that target more appealing to the troll's sadist sensibilities, thus making the spot irresistible. When a troll reaches the baited area, he usually diddles himself off the panicked creature. We have to endure that sight. A fool knight charges the distracted creature in its back, pushing it in what hopefully is a deep enough camouflaged spiked fire pit. If the charge is successfully stealthy, the troll is impaled at the bottom. We then light up the pitch, so the fire neutralizes the troll's regeneration ability. We proceed and use pikes to carve the spiked bastard even more, hopefully blinding it, making our quarry even more vulnerable to attack. By this point, the creature's hide is hardened to the max, so we can only target the eyes, nose, mouth, and ears. If we can't poke it blind, we wait for the charcoal stored in the walls of the pit to ignite and increase the heat. A second hole, much smaller, is dug next to the killing pit. The two chasms are connected by a narrow tunnel, so that the fire has a constant feed of air, making the blaze within more powerful. If something goes wrong, as all things so overly complicated do, our only chance is to piss off the solitary troll so much that it pursues our rider bait over the spiked fire pit. The camouflage frame that masks the pit would be strong enough to support the rider, yet flimsy enough to break under the weight of the huge pursuing darkling. The worst thing about this sort of work is that we can't harvest the slain troll for all the reagents that could be processed out of its corpse. A waste acceptable only because of a comparatively low casualty rate on our number. 1 shot, 1 kill. There's few things worse than knowing your plate armor and shield are next to nothing. That's what a Scorpio does. We have our own, and there's few things more pleasant than taking out orc bull chieftains without a fight. All that gritty, boisterous power, all that posturing and bellowing, and they go down from a single shot. We keep the weapons mounted on our wagons. It gives them a slight height advantage over the surrounding fields, making them able to shoot over our shield wall and into the enemy. It also makes them a posturing tool as well. Makes chieftains rethink if they really need to lead the charge and all. We also use the Scorpios to deter trolls from attacking our convoys directly. Shoves their ugly heads down behind hill ridges. Keeps them a stone hurls away, which is not great, but a lot better than having them charge our lines to snatch a snack out of the column. A flaming bolt will do that. Cause a grievous wound on a monstrous foe, and the alchemical fire makes sure the bugger won't regenerate anytime soon if it's a troll we're facing. Against flying marks, a Scorpio is not great, but it's better than nothing, and it makes sure if the bastard landed, it won't take off again. Not with a proper marksman behind the winches. It's not so different from shooting a heavy crossbow. You still aim in more or less the same way. Since it's unlawful not to know how to shoot a crossbow within the burgs, that means even our camp followers can use our strongest weapon. Makes it an ideal camp protector for when the lands are working outside the wagon forts. The cost is great, however. The sinews used, the composite arms of the bow, the winches and pulleys, they all stack an ugly price to pay per piece. We were fortunate enough to loot 2 of ours from a keep we stormed a few months ago. The rest we inherited from a disbanded mercenary group we merged with. They were called the Line. Got bankrupt. The Sons of Dismas paid for their debts and received all the goodies along with a few veterans and some greens that refused to retire. In total, we have 10 Scorpios, enough to discourage even a young worm from tackling us head on. If one breaks, we have a loyal armorer in the burg of Glaumark that can fix right about anything. He owes us big from back when we set up camp in his homestead during the 900s revolt, so he does all the work for half price. Makes it worth always venturing down south with the company, once every year or so. We once had a gnome traveling with us for 3 months or so. Said he was from the clan of Nargabund. He was really keen on fixing a queer system of pulleys on one of our Scorpios, as a token of his appreciation for keeping some cannibal refugees from eating him. The dwarven coterie allowed for a team of bulls to pull the contraption's harpoon back at its wagon. A system not very different from what they use on the new whaling vessels out in the East Ocean. This allowed us to make sure we could hunt wild troll bulls in their mating season. We would make a puppet out of a dead female, smear it with mating musk, and wait. The dumb beasts would approach the bait and get harpooned out of a prepared camouflaged ambush nest. The troll would try to flee at this point, yet the bulls would pull the quarry closer and closer and into a spike pit. Once inside the trap, the rope would detach, so it would not provide the fiend a means of escape. Next would follow clubbing and poleaxing the creature to pulp. A harvestable pulp, for alchemicals, of course. One must earn in any way possible to keep the company above bankruptcy in these trying times.